The lonely guest Natalie Brooks stood at the edge of the glittering ballroom, clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline. The Metropolitan Arts Center had transformed into a wonderland of crystal chandeliers. White orchids and elegant guests draped in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. She had received the invitation only because her small gallery had contributed a single painting to the charity auction. Now, surrounded by Manhattan's wealthiest elite, she felt like an imposter wearing a borrowed dress. The live orchestra played a romantic waltz, and couples glided across the marble floor with practiced grace. Natalie watched them with a mixture of admiration and loneliness. She knew exactly 3 people at this event, and all 3 were too busy networking to notice her standing alone in the corner. A woman in a burgundy gown passed by with her companion, their eyes sweeping over Natalie with barely concealed curiosity. She heard the whispered words that followed. Who invited her? She looked so out of place. Comments stung more than it should have. Natalie straightened her shoulders and reminded herself why she was here. Exposure, connections, opportunities for her struggling gallery. But as another couple swept past her without a glance, she wondered if coming alone had been a terrible mistake. The stranger's bold move. Natalie was contemplating a quiet escape when a tall figure appeared beside her table. She looked up to find a man standing there with an intensity that immediately commanded attention. He wore a perfectly fitted black tuxedo that highlighted his athletic build, and his dark hair was styled in a way that looked effortlessly sophisticated. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a striking shade of gray, observant and intelligent. "You look like you could use a rescue," he said, his voice low and smooth. Before she could respond, he leaned closer and added quietly, "Play along, please." Natalie blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" "Those women over there," he tilted his head slightly toward a group of elegantly dressed ladies watching them with keen interest. "Been trying to set me up all evening. If you pretend to be with me for just a few minutes, we both win. You escape the pity looks, and I escape the matchmaking." She should have said no. She should have politely declined and walked away. But something in his expression, a mixture of genuine appeal and subtle humor, made her pause. And honestly, he was right about the pity looks. What exactly would this rescue entail? She asked cautiously. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "One dance. Maybe some conversation that makes it look like we know each other. Nothing complicated." Natalie hesitated for only a moment before setting down her champagne glass. "All right. But if this turns out to be some weird social experiment, I'm leaving." The smile widened slightly. "Fair enough." An unforgettable dance, he offered his hand, and she took it. His palm was warm and firm as he led her onto the dance floor. The moment they stepped into position, she became acutely aware of how naturally they fit together. His hand rested gently on her waist, while his other hand held hers with just the right amount of pressure. Neither too tight nor too casual. "I'm Damien, by the way," he said, as they began to move to the music. "Damien Ashford." Natalie's steps faltered slightly. She knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name. Damien Ashford was the founder of Ashford Technologies, a company that had revolutionized cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. He was notoriously private, rarely appearing at social events, and known for his brilliant mind and reclusive nature. "I know who you are," she managed to say. "I'm Natalie Brooks. It's the art curator," he said, surprising her. "Your gallery featured that incredible exhibit on contemporary urban landscapes last spring. I read about it." She stared at him. "You read about my tiny gallery?" "I make it my business to know about interesting things happening in the city," he replied smoothly. "Your perspective on how modern artists interpret isolation in crowded spaces was fascinating." Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest. Most people at events like this never bothered to learn about her work. They saw her as a nobody trying to climb social ladders. But here was one of the most successful men in the city, and he had actually paid attention. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." They continued dancing, and Natalie found herself relaxing into the rhythm. Damien was an excellent dancer, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. Several heads turned to watch them, and she caught glimpses of the surprise on people's faces. The reclusive billionaire was dancing with an unknown woman, and they looked entirely too comfortable together. "The performance, they're watching us," Natalie whispered as they spun past a group of curious onlookers. "Let them watch," Damien replied calmly. "We're just two people enjoying a dance." It felt like more than that. Every time their eyes met, something electric passed between them. His hand on her waist seemed to burn through the fabric of her dress, and she found herself wondering what it would be like if this were real. If a man like Damien Ashford actually wanted to be with someone like her. When the song ended, polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Damien kept her hand in his as he led her off the floor. Instead of returning her to her lonely corner, he guided her toward the terrace doors. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere we can talk without an audience," he said, "unless you'd prefer to go back to standing alone." She glanced back at the ballroom, where several women were already moving in their direction with determined expressions. The terrace sounds perfect. Moment of truth. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the crowded ballroom. The terrace overlooked Central Park, and the city lights created a magical backdrop. Natalie leaned against the stone railing, suddenly aware that she was alone with one of the most powerful men in New York. "Thank you for the dance," she said, trying to sound casual. "I think your matchmaking problem is solved for tonight." Damien moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his subtle cologne. "What if I told you that wasn't entirely true?" She turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I came to this event knowing I'd be cornered by well-meaning socialites trying to fix my bachelor status," he explained. "But I didn't plan on meeting someone genuinely interesting. Someone who looks at art the way most people look at financial statements. Someone who doesn't seem impressed by money or status." Natalie's heart beat faster. "You don't know anything about me. I know you came here alone, probably because you thought it would help your career," he said perceptively. "I know you felt out of place, but stayed anyway because you're determined. I know you agreed to help a stranger because you're kind despite being cautious, and I know that in the last 15 minutes, I've felt more at ease than I have in months." She didn't know how to respond to that. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part reminded her that men like Damien Ashford didn't pursue women like her. This was probably just an amusing diversion for him. "Do you want from me?" she asked directly. Damien was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the moonlight. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'd like to find out. Would you be willing to continue this arrangement for a while?" "What arrangement? Pretending to be your date? More than pretending?" he said carefully. "I need someone genuine by my side for business events. Someone who won't get caught up in the social games and media attention. In return, I can offer you connections, exposure for your gallery, and access to a world that could change your career." It sounded too good to be true. And Natalie had learned long ago that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But as she looked into Damien's steady gaze, she saw something unexpected. Loneliness that mirrored her own. "Let me think about it," she said finally. He nodded, pulling a business card from his pocket. "Take all the time you need. But Natalie, for what it's worth, tonight was the first time in years I've enjoyed one of these events. That's because of you." As he walked back toward the ballroom, leaving her alone with her thoughts and his card, Natalie realized something had shifted. The lonely girl standing in the corner had disappeared. In her place stood a woman who had just caught the attention of a billionaire, and despite all her reservations, she couldn't deny the spark of excitement burning in her chest. The question was, would she be brave enough to see where it led? The proposal 3 days passed before Natalie found the courage to call the number on Damien's card. She had spent those days researching him obsessively, reading articles about his company, his philanthropy, and his famously private lifestyle. Everything she learned painted him as brilliant but isolated. A man who had built an empire while keeping the world at arm's length. When she finally dialed, he answered on the second ring. "I was beginning to think you'd decided against it," Damien said without preamble. "I needed time to think," Natalie replied, pacing her small apartment. "This whole thing feels surreal. I understand. Can we meet in person? I'd like to discuss the details properly." They agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan social scene. When Natalie arrived, she found Damien already there, dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater. He looked different without the tuxedo, more approachable and somehow younger. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing as she approached. His manners were impeccable, she noticed. Old-fashioned in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. They ordered coffee and found a corner table away from other patrons. Damien wasted no time getting to the point. "I need a partner for approximately 6 months," he began. "There are several major events coming up, including product launches, investor meetings, and a technology summit in San Francisco. My board has been pressuring me about my image. They think I'm too disconnected, too cold. Having someone by my side would help soften that perception." Natalie wrapped her hands around her warm cup. "And what do I get out of this, besides feeling like a hired actress?" "Access," Damien said simply. "I know collectors, gallery owners, and art investors who could transform your career. I'll introduce you to them, help fund exhibitions, and provide resources your gallery desperately needs. I've seen your financial records, Natalie. You're 3 months from closing." She bristled at that. "You investigated me?" "I investigate everyone I do business with," he said without apology. "But I also saw your talent, your vision. You deserve better than to lose everything because of cash flow problems." It was manipulative, she thought. But it was also practical and honest. She appreciated that he wasn't trying to dress it up as something romantic. "Ground rules," she said firmly. "No lying to each other. If this is business, we treat it as such. And I can walk away any time if it becomes uncomfortable." Agreed. "And Natalie, one more thing." He leaned forward slightly. "What happens in private stays private. In public, we're a couple. But behind closed doors, we're honest about what this is." She nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow night. There's a tech industry gala. Consider it your first test." Into the spotlight, the transformation happened faster than Natalie expected. The next morning, a stylist arrived at her apartment with garment bags and makeup cases. By evening, she looked like someone who belonged in Damien's world. The midnight blue gown hugged her curves perfectly, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. When Damien's driver picked her up, she felt like Cinderella heading to the ball. Except this time, she knew exactly when midnight would strike. Damien was waiting outside the venue when she arrived. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, and something flickered in his expression before he controlled it. "You look stunning," he said, offering his arm. "Part of the arrangement," she replied lightly, trying to ignore how her skin tingled where he touched her. The gala was overwhelming. Cameras flashed as they entered, and Natalie heard the whispers immediately. "Who is she? When did Ashford start dating?" "She's nobody, just some gallery owner." Damien's hand tightened on hers. "Ignore them," he murmured. "You're here with me. That's all that matters." Throughout the evening, he was attentive in a way that felt almost real. He introduced her to tech CEOs and venture capitalists, always mentioning her gallery and artistic vision. Several people expressed interest in visiting her exhibitions. By the end of the night, she had a dozen business cards and 3 tentative commitments for future collaborations. "You're good at this," she told him during a quiet moment. "At what?" "Making people believe we're real." Damien looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Maybe I'm not trying as hard as you think." Before she could process that statement, they were pulled into another conversation. But his words lingered in her mind for the rest of the evening. Cracks in the facade over the next few weeks. Natalie and Damien fell into a routine. Public appearances twice a week, carefully coordinated to maximize media exposure. Between events, they communicated mostly through texts and brief phone calls to coordinate schedules. But something unexpected began to happen. Their conversations started lasting longer. What began as logistical discussions evolved into genuine exchanges about art, technology, philosophy, and life. Natalie discovered that Damien had a dry sense of humor and surprising knowledge about classical music. He learned that she had grown up in a small town in Oregon and put herself through college working 3 jobs. One evening, after a particularly tedious investor dinner, Damien suggested they skip the after-party. "Want to see something?" he asked. "That's ominously vague," Natalie replied. But she was curious. He drove them to a nondescript building, in downtown Manhattan. Using a private elevator, they ascended to the top floor. When the doors opened, Natalie gasped. The entire space was an art studio, filled with canvases, paints, and sculptures in various stages of completion. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. "This is yours?" she asked, wandering among the pieces. "My secret," Damien admitted. "I started painting in college as a way to manage stress. Nobody knows about this place, except my assistant and now you." Natalie examined a large, abstract piece, drawn to its raw emotion and bold colors. "These are incredible. Why keep it secret?" "Because Damien Ashford, the CEO, can't have hobbies that make him seem human," he said with bitter humor. "The board wants me focused, driven, and slightly intimidating. Artists are seen as soft." She turned to face him. "That's ridiculous. Creating something takes more courage than most business decisions." "You understand that?" he said quietly. "Most people don't." In that moment, standing in his private sanctuary, Natalie realized the arrangement had stopped feeling like business. She was starting to see the real Damien, the man behind the billionaire facade. And that terrified her. Dangerous territory, the shift became undeniable at a charity auction 3 weeks later. They were seated at a table with several prominent couples when someone asked how they met. Natalie started to give the rehearsed story they had prepared. But Damien interrupted her. She was standing alone at a gala. "Looking like she'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his eyes on Natalie. "I walked over and asked her to dance. Best decision I ever made." The way he said it, the warmth in his voice, made it sound completely true. Natalie's heart hammered in her chest. This was supposed to be an act. The line between performance and reality was blurring. Later that night, as they left the venue, a photographer jumped out, camera flashing. Damien instinctively pulled Natalie close, shielding her. But instead of the calculated pose they usually struck for cameras, this felt protective. Real dot in the car, tension crackled between them. Natalie stared out the window, trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. "Natalie," Damien's voice broke the silence. "We need to talk about what's happening." "Nothing's happening," she said quickly. "Too quickly. Don't." His voice was firm. "Don't pretend you don't feel it too." She finally looked at him. In the dim light of the car, his expression was vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "This was supposed to be business," she whispered. "We had rules." "Rules change," he said. "Feelings don't follow contracts. Damien, I can't. If this goes wrong, I lose everything. My gallery, my reputation, my heart. You have a safety net. I don't." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "You think I have a safety net?" "Natalie, I've spent 10 years building walls around myself. You walked through them in one night. That scares me more than any business risk I've ever taken." The car stopped outside her apartment. They sat in loaded silence, neither wanting to be the first to move. "I need time," Natalie finally said. "This is too much, too fast." Damien nodded, releasing her hand. "Take whatever time you need. But know this, I'm not pretending anymore. Whatever happens next, it's real for me." She escaped into her apartment, her mind spinning. This was exactly what she had feared. The arrangement that was supposed to be simple had become impossibly complicated. And the worst part was, she didn't want to walk away. The breaking point for 2 weeks, Natalie avoided Damien's calls. She threw herself into work, using upcoming exhibitions as an excuse to maintain distance. But the media had other ideas. Pictures of them together were everywhere, fueling speculation about their relationship. Her gallery suddenly had waiting lists for viewings, and collectors were taking her seriously for the first time. Everything she had worked for was finally coming together. Because of him, then the story broke. Natalie was at her gallery when her phone exploded with notifications. A tabloid had published an expose titled, "The Billion-Dollar Fake Romance: Ashford's Desperate Image Makeover." The article detailed their arrangement with shocking accuracy, painting Natalie as a gold digger and Damien as a manipulative CEO using her for PR purposes. Someone had leaked their agreement, though key details were distorted to make them both look terrible. Her phone rang. It was Damien. "Don't read the comments," were his first words. "Please, Natalie, don't read them." But she already had. The internet was vicious. People called her a social climber, a wannabe Cinderella, a fame seeker. They said Damien was pathetic for having to pay someone to date him. "How did this happen?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." His voice was hard with anger. "Natalie, where are you?" "I'm coming to you." "No," she said quickly. "The press is probably already on their way here. We can't be seen together right now. I don't care about the press." "Well, I do." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Damien, this is exactly what I was afraid of. My reputation is destroyed. People are saying terrible things. Clients are already calling to cancel appointments." "Then we tell them the truth," he insisted. "What truth?" "That it started as fake, but became real? That sounds even worse." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Damien spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Is that what it became for you? Real?" Natalie closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It doesn't matter now. It's the only thing that matters." "I have to go," she whispered, and ended the call. The investigation, Damien refused to let it end there. While Natalie retreated into her gallery, he launched a private investigation into the leak. It took his team only 3 days to trace the source. Richard Brennan, a rival CEO who had been trying to acquire Ashford's technologies for years. Brennan had paid an assistant at the restaurant where Damien and Natalie first discussed their arrangement. The assistant had recorded their conversation and sold it to the highest bidder. But Damien didn't just want to expose Brennan. He wanted to fix what had been broken. He showed up at Natalie's gallery on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She was alone, standing in front of a painting she had been staring at for an hour without really seeing it. "You shouldn't be here," she said without turning around. "I have information you need too." Here he walked up beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I know who leaked our arrangement and why. I have proof that the conversation was illegally recorded and that key details were fabricated to make the story more sensational." Natalie finally looked at him. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble shadowing his jaw. "Does it matter? The damage is done. It matters because you deserve the truth. And because I'm not going to let Richard Brennan destroy what we had." "What did we have, Damien?" She turned to face him fully. "A business arrangement that got out of hand? Feelings that developed in the most artificial situation possible?" "No," he said firmly, stepping closer. "What we had was real from the moment you trusted me enough to take my hand on that dance floor. Everything after that, every conversation, every moment we shared, that was us. Not the arrangement. Us. How can you be sure?" "Because I've spent 2 weeks miserable without you," he said simply. "Because I've canceled every public appearance, because the thought of standing in those rooms without you feels empty. Because when I paint now, every canvas ends up looking like you." Natalie's breath caught. "You painted me." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was a portrait, soft and romantic, capturing her laughing at something off canvas. The detail, the emotion in it, was breathtaking. "I started it the day after we met," he admitted. "I couldn't get you out of my head. The arrangement was my excuse to keep you in my life. But Natalie, I would have found a way regardless." The choice stares streamed down Natalie's face. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "Of this, of us, of losing myself in your world." Damien gently cupped her face, wiping away tears with his thumbs. "Then don't lose yourself. Keep your gallery, your independence, your fierce determination to succeed on your own terms. I'm not asking you to become part of my world. I'm asking if I can be part of yours. The media will never leave us alone. Probably not. But we'll handle it together. And this time, we tell the truth on our terms." He pulled back slightly. "I'm holding a press conference tomorrow. I'm going to explain everything. The arrangement, Brennan's sabotage, and most importantly, how what started as a deal became the most real thing in my life. But I need to know if you're with me. Not for the cameras or the appearances. Just for us." Natalie looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope, the fear that matched her own. She thought about the past months, how he had supported her dreams, introduced her to opportunities, but never tried to control her. How he had shown her his hidden studio, his private self, trusting her with parts of himself he showed no one else. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it honestly. No more arrangements, no more contracts. Just two people figuring it out." "It's just two people," he agreed, a smile breaking across his face. "And if it doesn't work out, then at least we tried. But Natalie, I think we're worth the risk." She reached up and kissed him, pouring everything she had been holding back into that moment. It wasn't their first kiss, but it was their first real one, unobserved and unperformed. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "Okay," she said. "Let's tell the truth. New beginning." The press conference the next day was unlike anything the media expected. Damien stood at the podium with Natalie beside him, their hands intertwined. He explained the arrangement clearly, taking full responsibility for the deception. But then he did something unprecedented. He opened up about his loneliness, his struggle with public expectations, and how meeting Natalie had changed everything. "I asked her to pretend because I thought that was safer than risking real feelings," he said, looking directly at Natalie. "I was wrong. She taught me that the real risk was never opening my heart at all. Yes, our relationship began unconventionally, but what we found together is genuine. And I'm not going to apologize for falling in love with the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The room erupted with questions, but Natalie stepped forward to the microphone. "I agreed to the arrangement because I needed help saving my gallery," she said honestly. "But I stayed because Damien sees me as an equal, supports my dreams, and challenges me to be better. Everyone wants to know if our relationship is real. Here's the truth. It's the most real thing in my life. Everything else is just details." The story that emerged from that press conference was different from the tabloid scandal. It was human, relatable, and ultimately romantic. Public opinion began to shift. People loved the honesty, the vulnerability, the fairy tale that had started with deception but ended in truth. Richard Brennan faced legal consequences for the illegal recording, and his reputation suffered far more than Damien's ever had. 6 months later, Natalie's gallery hosted its biggest exhibition yet, featuring emerging artists alongside established names. Damien had helped secure funding, but he insisted his name stayed off all publicity. This was her achievement, her vision brought to life. She stood in the center of the gallery, watching people admire the artwork. When familiar arms wrapped around her waist from behind, "Proud of you," Damien murmured against her ear. She leaned back into him, feeling completely at peace. "Thank you for not letting me run away. Thank you for being brave enough to stay." They had faced skepticism, media scrutiny, and the challenge of merging to very different lives. But they had done it by staying true to themselves and each other. Natalie still ran her gallery independently, and Damien still led his company. But they supported each other, challenged each other, and loved each other without pretense. "Remember when you asked me to pretend to be your date?" Natalie said, turning in his arms. "A best decision I ever made," Damien replied, echoing his words from that first night. "Even though it started as a lie?" He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It was never really a lie. It was just the truth, waiting to be discovered." As guests mingled around them and soft music played, Damien pulled her close for a dance, right there in the middle of her gallery. No cameras, no audience that mattered. Just two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, and this time there was no pretending at all.